"Will you save my mother's life for $5? Asked the 9-year-old girl as she walked into the Iron Valley hideout with a crumpled $5 bill clutched in her small hand. The entire canyon went dead silent. 15 outlaws sat frozen mid-conversation, whiskey bottles halfway to their lips, card hands suspended in air. This wasn't a place for children. The Iron Valley gang was notorious in 3 territories: ex-military, ex-lawmen gone bad, former Confederate and Union soldiers who'd found they had more in common with each other than with the peace that followed the war. Men with violent pasts who wore their scars like badges of honor, their wanted posters like calling cards. Ironside, the gang's leader, was the first to move. He set down his cards and walked toward the girl. His massive frame, 6'5" and 280 pounds of muscle, scar tissue, and bad decisions would have terrified most adults. The scar running from his left eye to his jaw, courtesy of a Yankee saber at Gettysburg, usually made children scream. But the little girl didn't flinch. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ironside asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man who'd once killed 3 bounty hunters in a single gunfight. "Emma," the girl whispered. "Emma Rodriguez." "Emma, where are your parents?" "My mama's with Doc Thornton in town. She's dying." Emma's voice cracked, but she kept talking, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "The doc says she needs medicine, special medicine from back east, but we don't have money and it costs $500. And my uncle said he'll pay for it, but only if I go live with him forever. And my mama said no because he's a bad man. But if she dies, it's my fault because I couldn't save her. And I heard you do things for money, so I have $5. And please, please help me." The outlaws exchanged dark looks. Every man in that canyon knew what bad man meant when a 9-year-old said it with that kind of fear in her eyes. Bull, the second-in-command and former sergeant from the Union Army, stood up slowly. His massive arms, thick as fence posts, crossed over his chest. "Where's this uncle now?" "Outside in his wagon. He drove me here. He said outlaws are criminals, and if I ask you for help, you'll just take my money and laugh at me. But I don't care anymore because my mama is all I have." Flint moved to the canyon entrance and looked out. A black-covered wagon sat in the clearing, expensive horses hitched to it. The driver was checking his pocket watch, not even watching the hideout entrance. "Confident," Flint muttered, his hand instinctively touching the gun at his hip. "Or stupid," added Red Wolf, the Apache tracker who joined the gang after the army massacred his village. Ironside knelt down to Emma's level. His scarred face, a roadmap of violence from Shiloh to Cold Harbor, usually made children cry. But Emma met his eyes without flinching. "Your uncle drove you here to an outlaw hideout in the middle of the afternoon." Emma nodded. "He said he wanted me to learn a lesson. That nobody helps people for free. That the world is cruel and I need to understand that before I agree to live with him." The temperature in the canyon dropped 10 degrees. Every man in that hideout understood exactly what kind of lesson Emma's uncle was really planning to teach her. They'd all seen it before in different forms in different places. Some of them had failed to stop it when they should have. Some of them still had nightmares about those failures. "What's Doc Thornton saying about your mother?" Ironside asked. "He says she has consumption. Stage 4, he called it. The coughing blood won't stop. He says there's new medicine from a hospital in Boston that could save her, but it's experimental and expensive, and we can't afford it." Doc Miller, the gang's medic who'd been a field surgeon for the Confederacy before deserting, pulled out a piece of paper and pencil. "I know Thornton. Good man. Let me write him a message." Emma held out her $5 bill with shaking hands. "This is all I have. Will you help me save my mama?" Ironside looked at that $5 bill, crumpled and worn, probably saved from selling eggs or doing chores over weeks or months. And something inside his chest, something he thought had died at Antietam when he'd watched his entire company get cut down by artillery, tightened. He'd seen terrible things in his 42 years. War zones where boys barely old enough to shave had their limbs blown off. Prison camps where men died of starvation and disease. Streets where violence was the only language anyone understood. But watching a 9-year-old girl offer her last $5 to save her dying mother while her predator uncle waited outside hit different. Keep your money, Emma, Ironside said quietly. We'll help you. But first, we need to talk to your uncle. Emma's eyes went wide. He'll get mad. When he gets mad, She stopped, touching her arm where a bruise was visible beneath her sleeve. The outlaws saw that bruise. They saw the way Emma had stopped herself from finishing that sentence. They saw the fear in her eyes, the way she instinctively made herself smaller when she mentioned his anger. They saw everything they needed to see. Stay here, Ironside ordered, gesturing to Rosie, the only female member of the gang. Rosie's going to stay with you, the rest of you outside. Now. 14 outlaws filed out of the hideout in formation, moving like the soldiers most of them had once been. They spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route from the wagon. The Mercedes. No, the fancy wagon. The driver finally looked up from his pocket watch, his smug expression faltering slightly as he realized he was surrounded by 15 of the most dangerous men in the New Mexico territory. Roberto Chavez stepped down from the wagon slowly, carefully. He was in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit that marked him as successful. Probably a mine owner or land speculator, the kind of man who'd gotten rich off other people's suffering. His hair was perfectly oiled, his mustache waxed, everything about him screaming respectability and success. Gentlemen, Roberto said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I assume my niece made it inside safely? Your niece? Ironside said, his voice flat as a gun barrel. Offered us $5 to save her mother's life. Then she told us some interesting things about you. Roberto's smile tightened. Emma has an active imagination. Her mother has filled her head with nonsense. I'm simply trying to help family during a difficult time. By bringing a 9-year-old to an outlaw hideout at 2 in the afternoon. Bull stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow. To teach her a lesson. To show her reality, Roberto said, his voice taking on an edge. Her mother is dying. Someone needs to take custody. I'm the only family she has. I'm offering to pay for the treatment, but there are conditions. Emma needs to understand that nothing is free in this world. What conditions? Flint asked, his hand resting on his gun. That's between me and my sister, Roberto said. Now, I've been patient, but I'm taking Emma home. We have paperwork to sign with Doc Thornton. Emma's not going anywhere with you, Ironside said. Roberto's mask slipped. His eyes went cold, calculating. You're interfering with a family matter. I could ride into town right now and tell Sheriff Morrison that the Iron Valley gang is holding my niece hostage. How do you think that would go for men with bounties on their heads? Go ahead, Ironside said. Ride to town. Tell the sheriff. We'll wait right here. Roberto pulled out his pocket watch again. But before he could make a move, Doc Miller emerged from the hideout, a piece of paper in his hand. No need to ride anywhere, Roberto, Doc Miller said. I just sent a boy into town with a message for Doc Thornton. Asked him some questions about you. Roberto's face flushed red. That's inappropriate. And I got a telegraph response from an old friend of mine in Santa Fe. Doc Miller interrupted, pulling out a telegram. Dr. William Morrison. He remembers you. Or rather, he remembers treating a young girl at the Sisters of Mercy orphanage who'd been in your care. Girl had injuries consistent with abuse. You made a generous donation to the church, and suddenly everyone stopped asking questions. The color drained from Roberto's face. Then I contacted a colleague in Colorado Territory, Doc Miller continued. You were a schoolteacher there, weren't you? Until 3 families quietly withdrew their daughters from your class and you suddenly moved south. No charges filed. Just quiet departures and a town that was happy to see you go. Ironside felt something cold and furious settle in his chest. He'd killed men in war, boys really who'd been conscripted and thrown into battle. He'd killed men in self-defense, men who'd drawn on him first. He'd killed men who'd needed killing, outlaws worse than himself. But this was different. This was the kind of evil that hid behind respectability, that used legal authority and social position to prey on the vulnerable. How many? Ironside asked quietly, his voice carrying the tone that had once ordered men to fix bayonets and charge. How many girls, Roberto? I don't know what you're talking about. How many? Bull stepped even closer, and several other outlaws moved in, tightening the circle. Roberto looked around at the ring of dangerous men closing in on him. Men who'd survived war, prison, violence, men who knew exactly what he was and had zero tolerance for it. I could call the sheriff. Roberto tried again, but his voice was shaking now. I could have bounty hunters here by nightfall. My brother, Flint said quietly. Sheriff Morrison. He's my brother. We don't always see eye to eye on the law, but we see eye to eye on men who hurt children. You want me to ride into town and fetch him? Because I'd love to introduce you. Roberto was sweating now despite the afternoon shade. This is extortion. No, Ironside said, stepping so close that Roberto had to crane his neck to look up at him. Extortion is what you did to Emma's mother, offering to save her life only if she hands over her daughter to a predator. What we're doing is giving you a choice. He leaned down, his scarred face inches from Roberto's. You have two options. Option 1. You get in your fancy wagon right now and leave. You disappear from the Rodriguez family's life permanently. You never contact them, never come near them, never even think about them again. You vanish from this territory like you vanished from Colorado and Santa Fe. Roberto's jaw clenched. And option 2? Option 2, Bull said, cracking his knuckles with sounds like breaking timber. We have a longer conversation, the kind that involves my brother the sheriff, federal marshals, and telegrams to every family you've ever helped. The kind that ends with you in a territorial prison explaining to other inmates exactly what you did to children. The silence stretched. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing through the canyon. Prison's real hard on men like you, Red Wolf added conversationally, his Apache accent thick. Prisoners, they don't like child herders. White men, Mexican men, black men, Indian men, they all agree on that. Bad accidents happen. Real bad ones. Roberto looked at each man in turn, seeing no mercy, no hesitation, no bluff. These were men who'd killed before and would kill again if necessary. More importantly, these were men who considered protecting children a sacred duty, the one line they would not allow to be crossed. You have 10 seconds, Ironside said. Then we ride to town and fetch the sheriff. Your choice. Roberto's ego warred with his survival instinct. Survival won. He climbed back into his wagon without another word, his hands fumbling with the reins. The expensive horses, sensing his panic, stamped and tossed their heads. If I see you in this territory again, Ironside called after him, there won't be a conversation. There won't be options. There won't be a warning. Do you understand me? Roberto didn't answer. He just whipped the horses into motion and the wagon lurched forward, wheels kicking up dust as he fled down the canyon trail. The outlaws watched until the wagon was just a dark speck in the distance, until even the dust had settled. Coward. Bull spat into the dirt. They always are, Flint said. Only brave when facing someone who can't fight back. Doc Miller shook his head. Men like that, they run when confronted. They're predators, not fighters. Different breed of evil. Ironside turned back toward the hideout, his limp more pronounced now that the adrenaline was fading. His war wound always hurt worse when he was angry. Now we've got the real problem. Emma's mother still needs that medicine. $500 plus shipping costs. Doc Thornton says we've got maybe 2 weeks before it's too late. We don't have that kind of money, Bull said quietly. Gang's been laying low since that last job went sideways. We've got maybe $100 between all of us. Then we find it, Ironside said. We don't rob for it. That brings federal marshals down on us and we can't help Emma if we're dead or in prison. But we've got contacts, people who owe us. Time to call in every favor we've got. Inside the hideout, Emma was sitting at a rough wooden table with Rosie, drinking water from a tin cup. Rosie, whose real name was Rosa Martinez, former brothel girl turned outlaw after she'd killed the man who'd bought her from her father, had somehow produced a piece of hardtack and was trying to get Emma to eat. The girl looked up when the men entered, her eyes wide with hope and fear warring on her young face. Is my uncle gone? He's gone, Ironside confirmed. And he's not coming back. Ever. Emma's shoulders sagged with relief so profound she nearly fell off the log she was sitting on. Then her face crumpled. But, my mama, the medicine. We're working on that, Ironside said. He pulled up a log and sat across from her, wincing as his bad leg protested. Emma, I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that? She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Good girl. Now, Doc Miller is going to write to Doc Thornton and find out exactly what medicine your mother needs and how to get it here. Doc Miller was already writing, his pencil scratching across paper. Thornton mentioned it before, streptomycin derivative. New treatment from Massachusetts General Hospital. They've been testing it on consumption patients with good results. But it's experimental, expensive, and hard to get this far west. How hard? Ironside asked. I'd need to send a telegram to Boston, arrange payment through a bank, have it shipped by express coach through 3 territories, Doc Miller said, not looking up from his writing. Even with money in hand, we're looking at 8 to 10 days minimum. That's if everything goes perfect, which it never does. Then we'd better make sure everything goes perfect, Ironside said. He turned to his men. Bull, you've got contacts in the railroad camps up north. Anyone with money? Foreman owe me from that time we helped with the claim jumpers, Bull said. And there's the Chinese workers, we protected them from those vigilantes last year. They might contribute. Do it. Flint, your brother the sheriff. He won't help outlaws, Flint said. But he might help a dying woman and her daughter. Let me talk to him. Red Wolf, what about your people? The Apache scout was quiet for a moment. My tribe is scattered, but there are others Navajo Pueblo. We have helped them. They might help us. Santiago, Ironside called to a Mexican vaquero who joined the gang after Americans stole his family's land grant. Your family? My cousin runs a supply business in Santa Fe, Santiago said. We don't speak much since I became an outlaw, but for a child, he would help. One by one, the outlaws made their plans. Each had contacts, people they'd helped, debts to call in, favors to ask. The Iron Valley gang might be wanted men, but they'd spent years building a network of unlikely allies across the territory. People who understood that sometimes the law wasn't enough, that sometimes you needed men willing to operate in the gray spaces between right and wrong. Rosie disappeared into the back of the hideout and returned with a small leather pouch. She opened it and counted out $43 in various coins and bills. My savings. Every cent. For the girl. Emma stared at the money like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why would you help us? You don't even know me. Rosie's hand unconsciously touched her own throat, where a scar from a knife wound was barely visible above her collar. Because once I was a girl who needed help and didn't get it. Because my father sold me when I was 12 years old and nobody stopped him. Because I swore if I ever had the chance to be different, to help instead of hurt, I would take it. That's why. The room fell quiet. Then, one by one, each outlaw began to speak. Each shared the wound that had never quite healed, the moment that had broken something inside them, the reason why they wouldn't walk away from a child in need. Bull went first. His voice was rough, like gravel sliding down a mountainside. Had a little girl once, back in Ohio before the war. She was 6 years old when I got conscripted. Fought for 4 years, survived battles that killed better men than me. Came home to find my daughter had died of fever while I was gone. Wife blamed me for leaving. Blamed me for surviving when our girl didn't. He looked at Emma. I couldn't save my daughter, but I can save you and your mama. So I will. Flint lit a cigarette with shaking hands. My sister. She was 14 when a respectable man in our town started paying attention to her. My father was sheriff. He didn't see it, didn't want to believe his friend could be that kind of monster. By the time I figured it out and did something about it, he took a long drag. Well, that's why I'm an outlaw and not a deputy. Killed the bastard. My brother understands why I did it, even if he can't say so publicly. Nobody helped my sister when she needed it. I won't make that mistake again. Santiago spoke in heavily accented English. The Americans came after the war with Mexico. They had papers, legal papers that said our family's land we had for 5 generations, wasn't ours anymore. My father tried to fight in their courts. They hanged him for it, called him a bandit. My mother died of a broken heart 6 months later. Left me and my sisters orphans. He exhaled slowly. Nobody helped us. Nobody cared that legal theft is still theft. I swore I would help when I could, because I remember what it felt like to lose everything and have nobody care. Red Wolf spoke in careful English, his Apache accent making each word deliberate. The long walk. The army forced my people from our homeland. They said it was for our own good, that we would be safe on the reservation. My sister, she was sick, needed medicine. The army doctor had medicine but said Indians didn't deserve it, that we were savages who should die. His eyes were hard as flint. She died in my arms. I was 12 years old. Since that day I swore, no child dies because someone with power decides they don't matter. Not while I breathe. A former Confederate named Jackson spoke up, his Tennessee drawl thick. Lost my whole family to Sherman's march. Yankees burned our farm, killed my parents, took my little brother. He was 8 years old. I searched for 2 years after the war ended. Never found him. Don't know if he's alive or dead, slave or free, lost or found. He slammed his fist on the table. But I know what it's like to be helpless, to watch everything burn and not be able to stop it. This girl's mother ain't dying because some rich bastard thinks he can buy children. Not while I'm standing. Even the quiet ones spoke. A former Union cavalry officer named Nathaniel, who'd lost his wife and newborn baby to influenza while he was off fighting. A Chinese immigrant named Lu Wei, who'd watched his father work himself to death building the Transcontinental Railroad for pennies a day. A freed slave named Moses, who'd escaped bondage only to lose his sister to bounty hunters who didn't care that Lincoln had freed the slaves. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Powerlessness. Loss. The moment when you realized the world was crueler than you'd imagined and that help wasn't coming. That the law didn't protect people like you. That money and power and respectability mattered more than justice or compassion or basic human decency. And each man had made the same choice, to be different, to be the help that never came for them, to use the skills they'd learned in war and hardship and survival to protect instead of prey. Emma listened to all of it, tears streaming down her face, her small hands clutched in her lap. When the last man finished speaking, she looked around at these scarred, dangerous, broken men and whispered, "But you're outlaws. You're supposed to be bad men." Ironside smiled, and it was a sad smile, the kind that comes from knowing too much about the world. "We are bad, little one. We've done bad things. Robbed stages, rustled cattle, fought, killed. We've got bounties on our heads and prices on our lives. But we're bad men who choose not to hurt children. We're bad men who protect instead of prey. That's what makes us different from your uncle. He pretends to be respectable while doing evil. We know we're outlaws, but we choose to do good when we can. So we help," Rosie said, finishing the thought, "because we remember being helpless, because we swore we'd be different, because that's what family does, and you became family the moment you walked through that canyon in trance." Emma held out her $5 again, her small hand trembling. "I still want you to have this. Please." Ironside looked at those bills. A child's life savings, probably months of doing chores, selling eggs, whatever work a 9-year-old could find. He thought about the weight of them, not in paper and coins, but in hope and desperation and courage. He took them gently. "You know what we're going to do with this money, Emma?" She shook her head. "We're going to keep it," Ironside said, "but not to spend. We're going to put it somewhere special, where everyone who comes here can see it. And we'll tell them your story. How a 9-year-old girl taught a gang of outlaws what real courage looks like." Over the next 72 hours, the canyon hideout transformed into a command center. Riders came and went at all hours. Telegraph messages flew back and forth between towns and territories. The Iron Valley Gang called in every favor they'd ever earned, contacted every ally they'd ever made, reached out to every person who owed them or who they'd helped in the past. Bull rode hard to the railroad camps and returned 3 days later with $170 in a leather bag. Foreman contributed. Chinese workers took up a collection. They remember when we stopped the vigilantes from burning their camp. Even some of the Irish laborers pitched in. Flint met with his brother the sheriff in secret. Sheriff Morrison couldn't be seen helping outlaws, but he could quietly spread word through the town's merchants and businessmen. He returned with $90 and a promise of more if needed. Santiago's cousin in Santa Fe sent $100 by courier, along with a note that said simply, "For the child. May God bless her and her mother." Red Wolf disappeared into the desert for 2 days and returned with $60 in gold coins. Ironside suspected it came from raiding Mexican bandits who'd been terrorizing Apache settlements. But some questions were better left unasked. The Apache had their own code of justice. Rosie's network of saloon girls and brothel owners across 3 territories contributed another $80. Women who understood what it meant to be vulnerable, to be property, to desperately need help that never came. They sent what they could spare and messages of support. Even some of the gang's former victims contributed. A bank manager they'd robbed 2 years ago sent $20 with a note. "You left my family unharmed when you could have hurt us. Consider this a thank you for that mercy, and may it help this child's mother." By the end of the 3rd day, they had $570, enough for the medicine, the express shipping, and some extra for Emma and her mother to live on while Maria Rodriguez recovered. Doc Miller sent the telegraph to Massachusetts General Hospital that night. The reply came back at dawn. Medicine would ship immediately via express coach. Estimated arrival, 8 days. Those 8 days were the longest of Emma's young life. She stayed at the Canyon Hideout, sleeping in Rosie's tent, because her mother was too sick to care for her, and there was nowhere else safe to go. The Outlaws took turns keeping her company, teaching her to play cards, only for matchsticks, Rosie insisted, telling her cleaned-up versions of their adventures, showing her how to braid rope and care for horses. It was the strangest sight the territory had ever known. The notorious Iron Valley gang transformed into awkward, protective uncles to a 9-year-old Mexican girl. Hardened killers reading her stories. Former soldiers teaching her to whittle. Dangerous men making sure she ate and slept and didn't give up hope. Doc Thornton sent daily reports via messenger boys. Maria Rodriguez was fading fast. The consumption was winning. She had days left, maybe a week at most. They were racing death, and death had a significant head start. On the 6th day, Maria lost consciousness. Doc Thornton's message was grim. If the medicine doesn't arrive in the next 48 hours, it won't matter. Make preparations for the child. On the 7th day, Emma stopped talking. She sat at the canyon entrance, watching the trail, waiting for a coach that might not come in time. Her young face aged by worry and grief. On the 8th day, at 4 in the afternoon, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. The express coach thundered into the canyon like Salvation on wheels. Its team of 6 horses lathered and exhausted from days of hard running. The driver pulled up in a spray of dust and gravel, and before the wheels had fully stopped, he was tossing down a wooden crate stamped Massachusetts General Hospital, urgent medical supplies. Handle with extreme care. Doc Miller caught the crate like it was made of gold and glass. "Bull, Santiago, with me. We ride to town now." 3 horses were saddled in under 2 minutes. The Outlaws rode at a gallop, Doc Miller clutching the precious crate to his chest, taking the dangerous canyon trail at speeds that would have killed a lesser rider. They burst into town 20 minutes later, scattering chickens and shocked townspeople. Doc Miller jumped off his horse before it had fully stopped and ran into Doc Thornton's office. Doc Thornton had the treatment prepared within 15 minutes. The injection went into Maria Rodriguez's arm as the sun was setting on the 8th day. Then came the waiting. The first 24 hours after treatment showed no change. Maria remained unconscious, her breathing shallow, her pulse barely detectable. Emma sat beside her mother's bed in Doc Thornton's back room, holding her hand, refusing to eat or sleep. The 2nd day, Maria's fever broke. The burning heat that had been consuming her for months finally released its grip. Emma felt her mother's forehead go from scorching to merely warm, and for the first time in days, She allowed herself to hope. The third day, Maria opened her eyes. They were cloudy, confused, but aware. She looked at her daughter and whispered one word, "Mija." Emma burst into tears, clutching her mother's hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to destroy them. By the end of the first week, Maria was sitting up in bed, sipping broth, asking questions. Where was Roberto? Emma's face went dark with old fear, but Rosie, who'd been staying in town to help care for both of them, squeezed her shoulder. Gone. Forever. The Outlaws made sure of it. By the end of the second week, Maria was walking, slowly, carefully, like someone learning to trust her body again after it had betrayed her for so long. By the end of the month, Doc Thornton declared it a miracle. The consumption was in full retreat. The experimental medicine was working beyond anyone's expectations. Maria Rodriguez was going to live. More than that, she was going to recover fully. The Iron Valley gang threw a party at their canyon hideout, the kind of party that would become legend in the territory. They slaughtered a steer, cooked it over an open pit fire. Rosie and some of the saloon girls from town brought pies and bread. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else had a guitar. The music echoed through the canyon until midnight, mixing with laughter and storytelling and the kind of joy that only comes after staring death in the face and winning. Emma and Maria stood in the center of it all, surrounded by 15 outlaws and their ragtag collection of allies. Former soldiers and current criminals, men and women from every race and background the West had to offer, united by nothing except a shared commitment to protect the vulnerable and stand against predators. Maria Rodriguez looked at these dangerous people with tears streaming down her weathered face. You saved my life. You saved my daughter. You did it for $5 that you didn't even keep. Her voice broke. How can I ever repay you? You don't repay us, Ironside said firmly. You live. You raise your daughter. You show her that the world might be hard and cruel, but there are still people in it who give a damn. That's payment enough. But why? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You're outlaws. You have bounties on your heads. You don't know us. Why would you risk everything for strangers? And once again, each outlaw shared their story. The children they couldn't save. The parents they watched die. The siblings they lost. The moments of helplessness that had defined them, shaped them, broken them, and ultimately remade them into something different. So we help, Ironside said, completing the circle of stories. Because nobody helped us when we needed it most. Because we know what it feels like to be powerless, to watch someone you love suffer while people with money and power look away. Because we swore we'd be different, that we'd use our strength to protect instead of prey. And because you're not strangers anymore, Mrs. Rodriguez. You and Emma, you're family now. You became family the moment your daughter walked into our canyon with courage we'd forgotten existed. Maria pulled Emma close, both of them crying now. I don't understand this world anymore, where respectable men like my brother are monsters, and outlaws are the ones who save us. The world's more complicated than respectable folks want to admit, Rosie said, her scarred hand resting on Emma's shoulder. Sometimes the people society fears are the ones who save you. Sometimes the ones who look trustworthy are the predators. Judge people by what they do, not what they look like or what society says about them. Emma pulled away from her mother and walked to Ironside. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the $5 bills. He kept them safe for her all this time, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. These belong to you, she said, holding them out. You earned them 1,000 times over. No, Ironside said gently. We already decided what to do with them. Come here, I'll show you. He led her to a flat section of canyon wall where someone had built a simple wooden frame and mounted it to the rock face. Inside the frame, mounted on a piece of red cloth, were $5 bills. Below them, someone had carved directly into the rock. $5 offered by Emma Rodriguez. Age 9 to save her mother's life, summer 1883. This is the price of courage. Emma stared at it, then at Ironside, then back at the memorial. It's beautiful. It's a reminder, Ironside said, to everyone who comes here, to every outlaw who joins our gang, to every person who asks us for help, that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing what needs doing anyway. You taught us that, Emma. A 9-year-old girl reminded a gang of hardened outlaws what real bravery looks like. The $5 stayed on that canyon wall, and word spread like wildfire across the territory. Within 3 weeks, a young Apache woman with 2 small children and bruises on her face walked into the canyon. "I heard," she said simply. "I heard about the girl and the $5. I heard you help people. My husband, he beats us. I need help getting away." "You've got it," Rosie said immediately, already moving. "Bull, Santiago, we need a safe place for them tonight. Flint, talk to your brother. There's got to be some law we can use here." Within 2 months, the Iron Valley gang had helped 5 more families. A Chinese merchant being extorted by white businessmen. A freed slave family whose land was being stolen through legal trickery. A widow whose late husband's partner was trying to take her farm. A Mexican family being terrorized by vigilantes who wanted them gone. The gang's reputation evolved in strange ways. They were still wanted men, still had prices on their heads, still robbed the occasional stage or rustled cattle when money got tight. But they'd become something else too, protectors. The people they robbed were carefully chosen now. Corrupt officials, exploitative businessmen, men who'd gotten rich by crushing others. The money went to those who needed it most. The territorial governor tried to figure out how to handle them. Technically, they were criminals, but they were also solving problems that the law couldn't or wouldn't touch. Problems involving powerful men who owned judges and sheriffs. Problems where legal technicalities mattered more than justice. Eventually, an unofficial understanding was reached through back channels and quiet conversations. The Iron Valley Gang could continue operating as long as they avoided killing lawmen or robbing federal payrolls, and in return, they'd use their influence to keep peace in the parts of the territory where official law didn't quite reach. It wasn't legal. It wasn't official. It certainly wasn't what anyone would call proper justice. But in the messy, complicated world of the 1880s frontier, it worked. Emma Rodriguez grew up in the shadow of that legend. She watched her mother fully recover, watched as consumption released its grip and Maria Rodriguez became strong again, vital again, able to work and laugh and dream of a future she'd thought was lost. The extra money the gang had raised bought them a small house in town. Maria took in sewing and laundry work. They weren't rich, but they were alive, they were together, and that was worth more than all the gold in California. When Emma turned 13, she started helping Rosie at the saloon in town. Not serving drinks, Rosie was firm about that, but keeping books, managing supplies, helping coordinate the network of women who'd come to rely on Rosie's protection and support. When she was 16, Emma opened a small school for children from families that couldn't afford regular education. Mexican kids, Chinese kids, Indian kids, the children of former slaves, any child whose parents couldn't pay the fees the respectable school charged. The Outlaws helped her build the schoolhouse. Bull and Santiago did the heavy lumber work. Red Wolf showed the children how to track and hunt. Doc Miller taught basic medicine. Even Ironside, getting older now, his war wounds troubling him more each year, would come read to the children sometimes, his rough voice stumbling over words but his meaning clear. Education was freedom, knowledge was power, and every child deserved both regardless of what society said they were worth. When Emma was 22, she married a young man named Miguel Torres, the nephew of one of Santiago's cousins. It was a huge celebration, outlaws and townspeople mingling uneasily, the respectable citizens of the town forced to acknowledge that without the Iron Valley Gang, many of them wouldn't have the help and protection they'd needed over the years. Maria Rodriguez cried through the entire ceremony, tears of joy for her daughter's happiness and tears of gratitude for the impossible miracle that had given them both a second chance at life. Emma had 3 children over the next 7 years. Each one was baptized with half the Iron Valley Gang standing as godfathers, which scandalized the priest but pleased Emma immensely. Her children grew up knowing that family wasn't just about blood. It was about who showed up when you needed them, who protected you when you were vulnerable, who helped you when you had nothing to offer but hope and $5. The years passed. The frontier changed. The railroad brought more people, more law, more civilization, or what passed for it. Some of the outlaws died. Bull took a bullet in a shootout with cattle rustlers and died within the hour. Peaceful in the end. saying he'd lived longer than he'd expected and better than he'd deserved. Red Wolf went back to his people and was never seen again, though occasionally gifts would appear at the canyon hideout. Jerky, herbs, arrows, silent reminders that some bonds transcended law and society. Santiago bought a small ranch with money saved from the gang's activities, went legitimate, married a woman from Santa Fe, and raised sheep. He stayed in contact with the gang, though, providing a respectable face for when they needed to interact with the legal world. Doc Miller finally retired from the outlaw life and opened a practice in town. He treated everyone regardless of ability to pay, and his waiting room was always full of people the respectable doctors wouldn't see. He died at 73, beloved by the poor and suspicious of the wealthy until his last breath. Rosie eventually bought the saloon she'd been managing and turned it into the most successful business in town. She never married, said once was enough, referring to the man she'd killed to escape the brothel. But she raised 7 orphan girls over the years, teaching them to read and cipher and defend themselves and never, ever trust a man who seemed too good to be true. Ironside lived longer than anyone expected, given his war wounds and hard life. He made it to 67, his hair white, his limp pronounced, his scarred face even more weathered. He was sitting in front of the canyon hideout one afternoon when Emma came to visit with her youngest daughter, a bright-eyed 7-year-old named Sophia. "This is Mr. Maddox," Emma said, introducing them. "He's the man I told you about. The one who saved your grandmother when I was your age." Sophia looked up at the old outlaw with wide eyes. "Mama says you're a hero, but also says you're a bad man. How can you be both?" Ironside laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling in a barrel. "Smart question, little one. The truth is, the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. We're all just people making choices. I've made bad choices, hurt people, stolen things, broken laws. But I also made some good choices, protected children, helped families, stopped predators. Which one makes me who I am?" "Both," Sophia guessed. "Exactly both," Ironside said. "That's the secret nobody wants to admit. Good people do bad things sometimes. Bad people do good things sometimes. What matters is what you choose when the moment comes." He pointed to the memorial on the canyon wall, the $5 bills still mounted in their frame, faded now but protected from the weather. "You see those? Your grandmother gave me those when she was not much older than you. They taught me something important." "What?" Sophia asked. "That courage has a price, but it's not measured in money," Ironside said. "Those $5 meant hope. Meant a little girl willing to risk everything to save her mother. Meant more than all the gold I ever stole or earned. Because they reminded me that some things matter more than survival. Some things are worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth dying for if necessary." Sophia nodded solemnly, though Emma suspected her daughter didn't fully understand. That was fine. She would someday. When she was older, when life had tested her, when she faced her own moment of choice between doing what was easy and doing what was right. That evening, after Emma and Sophia had left, after the sun had set behind the western mountains and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, Ironside sat alone in the canyon and thought about his life. The war that had broken him, the violence that had defined him, the choices that had damned him in the eyes of the law but saved him in his own estimation. He thought about Emma walking into this canyon 23 years ago with $5 and desperate courage. He thought about all the people they'd helped since then, all the families protected, all the predators stopped. He thought about Bull dying with a smile, knowing he'd finally saved a child after failing his own daughter. He thought about Red Wolf returning to his people with honor restored. He thought about all of them, broken, violent, criminal men who'd chosen to be something more than what the world expected. The next morning, they found him dead. He'd passed peacefully in his sleep, sitting in his chair, facing the memorial on the canyon wall. The $5 bills were the last thing he'd seen. The funeral was enormous. Emma and her family came. Maria Rodriguez, now in her 60s and still healthy thanks to that miracle medicine from Boston, came and wept. Rosie closed her saloon for the day and brought all her girls. Santiago rode in from his ranch. Flint came, and even his brother the sheriff, who'd spent decades publicly disapproving of the Iron Valley Gang while privately working with them, attended and gave a eulogy that carefully avoided mentioning Ironside's criminal activities while praising his protection of the vulnerable. Half the poor families in the territory showed up. People the gang had helped over the years, children who'd been saved, women who'd been protected, men who'd been given second chances. The canyon was packed with mourners, a strange mix of outlaws and citizens, criminals and victims, all united in recognizing that whatever else Ironside had been, he'd mattered. They buried him in the canyon he'd called home for 25 years. The grave marker was simple: James Ironside, Maddox, 1841 to 1907, he chose to protect. Emma stood at the grave long after everyone else had left. Sophia held her hand, quiet and solemn in the way children get when they sense something important is happening even if they don't fully understand it. "Mama," Sophia said finally, "was he really a hero?" Emma thought about that question, about a man who'd killed in war and peace, who'd robbed and stolen and lived outside the law, about the same man who'd protected a terrified 9-year-old girl, who'd hunted down her predator uncle, who'd moved heaven and earth to save a woman he'd never met, about the complicated truth of human nature that respectable society refused to acknowledge. "Yes," Emma said finally, "in the ways that mattered most, he was a hero. He chose to be, when he could have chosen differently." The Iron Valley Gang continued for another decade after Ironside's death, led by Flint and then by younger men who joined over the years. But eventually, the frontier closed. The law became stronger, more organized, less willing to tolerate the gray areas where outlaws had once operated. One by one, the gang members died or retired or went legitimate. The canyon hideout was abandoned, left to the weather and wildlife. But the memorial remained. The $5 bills, protected in their frame, mounted on the canyon wall. Occasionally, someone would make the journey out to the abandoned hideout just to see them, to stand in front of that memorial and remember the legend of Emma Rodriguez and the outlaws who'd saved her mother. 20 years after Ironside's death, when Emma was in her 40s and her children were grown, a historical society petitioned to have the canyon hideout preserved. The memorial on the wall had become famous. The story had been written up in newspapers, turned into dime novels, much to Emma's embarrassment, and even mentioned in a book about frontier justice. The territorial governor, in one of his last acts before New Mexico became a state, declared the site a historical landmark. The canyon hideout was preserved, turned into a small museum, with the memorial and the $5 bills as the centerpiece. Emma was asked to speak at the dedication ceremony. She stood in front of a crowd of politicians, historians, journalists, and curious citizens, and she told the true story. Not the romanticized version from the dime novels, but the real one. About being a terrified 9-year-old girl. About her predator uncle. About walking into a canyon full of dangerous men with nothing but $5 and desperate hope. About the outlaws who'd chosen to be heroes when they could have chosen to be villains. "People want to make this story simple," Emma said, her voice carrying across the canyon. "They want the outlaws to be purely good or purely bad. They want clear heroes and obvious villains. But life isn't simple. The men who saved me and my mother, they were criminals. They'd done terrible things. They had blood on their hands and prices on their heads." She paused, looking at the memorial on the wall. "But they were also the only ones who helped when we needed it most. The respectable people, they looked away. They had excuses. They had reasons. But the outlaws, these dangerous men that society feared, they showed up. They protected us. They saved us. So when you look at those $5 on that wall," Emma continued, "don't see a simple story of good versus evil. See the complicated truth of human nature. See the way broken people can choose to do good things. See the way society's judgments are often wrong. See the way courage can come from the most unexpected places. And remember that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the people the world tells you to fear are the ones who will save you." The $5 bills still hang on that canyon wall today, though the hideout is long abandoned and the museum closed decades ago. The frame is weathered now, the bills faded almost white, barely legible. But people still make pilgrimages to see them, historians studying frontier justice, descendants of people the Iron Valley Gang helped, tourists following legends. And if you stand in that canyon at sunset, When the light hits the memorial just right, you can almost imagine you hear them. 15 outlaws sitting around a fire, telling stories of the children they'd saved and the families they'd protected. You can almost see them. Dangerous men choosing to be heroes, broken people choosing to heal others, outlaws choosing honor over profit. That's the legend of the $5. That's the truth Emma Rodriguez lived and the Iron Valley Gang proved. And those $5 bills, faded now but still mounted in their frame, testify to it. A reminder that courage is currency, that family transcends blood, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the world's judgment is exactly wrong. Sometimes the people society fears are the ones who save you. Sometimes $5 is worth more than 500. Sometimes the hardest men have the softest hearts. Sometimes bad people make the best heroes. That's the secret the respectable world doesn't want to admit. But Emma Rodriguez knew it. The Iron Valley Gang proved it. And those $5 bills, hanging on a canyon wall in what used to be New Mexico territory, testify to it still. Waiting for the next person who needs to learn that courage, compassion, and honor can come from the most unexpected places, and that family isn't who you're born to, but who shows up when you need them most.